Here's a guy who thinks that DNA and the Bible are somehow proof that a God exists. In his last video, he tried to argue that the existence of devil worshippers is somehow evidence that a God exists.
Alright guys, in the first video I talked about the reality of both a physical and a spiritual world. We talked about Satanism, but you need to know that Satanism, real Satanism, is real.
What's your point? The fact that some people practice real Satanism, by which I guess he means Satanists who actually believe in Satan, as opposed to the Church of Satan or Satanic Temple who don't, isn't evidence that Satan exists. Real Hinduism is real in the sense that it's really a religion. Would you take that as evidence that reincarnation occurs? And even if Satan did exist, even that wouldn't prove that a God does.
They pray to the devil. They do sick rituals, and the reality of demons and the devil and his demons are real. People know this to be true because they experience it.
People say they experience it. Do you believe every description of a supposed supernatural experience you ever hear? Do you believe Joseph Smith because he said he experienced the angel Moroni? Or Muhammad because he said he experienced the angel Gabriel?
Human DNA. In part 1 of this series, I touched a little bit on intelligent design behind the creation of the world and the universe. But now, I want you to look at yourself, your DNA. Did you know that we only discovered DNA in the 20th century? Watson and Crick discovered the DNA structure, and we saw it for the first time in the Nature magazine in 25 April 1953.
It was the journal Nature, not the Nature magazine.
Your DNA, and even that of animals, it's just so complex that it's impossible to have just been here by chance, by random chemicals, and there you go, there's just another human and another animal.
And nobody claims that it's here by chance. It's here because of natural selection, which does not operate by chance.
It's impossible. It was created by higher intelligence, by Almighty God.
You say that as though random chance and a higher intelligence are the only two thinkable explanations. Nature doesn't work randomly. Life neither developed randomly nor from a higher intelligence.
The scientists, they call DNA the instruction book for life. Let me explain it to you a little bit better with the help of Joe Hansen. Everything you are or will be made of starts as a tiny book of instructions that's found in each and every cell.
DNA is only metaphorically a book of instructions. In reality, it is a strand of molecules that can reproduce itself and produce proteins. No intelligence is necessary for either of these things to happen.
Every time your body wants to make something, it goes back to the instruction book, your DNA. It looks it up and then puts it together.
It makes a copy of some of the DNA in the form of mRNA, which then runs through a ribosome that sticks together amino acids in a sequence corresponding to the sequence of the nucleotides in the mRNA. Don't take the metaphor of looking up instructions so literally. Nothing intelligent, conscious, or deliberate is going on here.
Your book has 46 chapters, one for each chromosome. Do you know just how much there is? How many letters in each book? Each of your book's 46 chapters is between 48 and 250 million letters long. That's around 3.2 billion letters total. This is the language of DNA. It's impossible to have just appeared from nothing.
And nobody claims it did. The Bible, though, claims that it somehow came together by a guy blowing into some dust. That's how Genesis says that Adam was created. For some reason, apologists find this to be more credible than evolution.
Look, DNA does a lot of things, like determining your height, the color of your hair, the color of your eyes, and the color of your skin. All life is pre-written in DNA. Creating the DNA language is not the only difficult part. Your body also needs to know how to read this language. This just blows my mind. Ray Comfort explains it in this way.
Oh yay, renowned biologist Ray Comfort. I can't wait to hear his expert analysis.
DNA is the instruction book of life. DNA is made of genes, and genes give instructions to the cells as to how your body should grow. Did you know that if those instructions, the instruction book of your DNA, just your DNA was laid out end to end, it would go to the sun and back in number of times. How amazing is that?
It's amazingly irrelevant to the question of whether a God exists.
Ray then uses the example of just a normal book to explain it in a more simple way. Let me use the same example that he used. Do you believe that a book like this can create itself? That it can create letters, words, sentences, and pictures by itself from nothing?
I don't believe that anything can create itself from nothing, nor do I believe that even an all-powerful being can coherently create anything from nothing. That's why I don't believe there ever could have been nothing. If there were ever nothing, then nothing could have ever come to exist.
Of course not. This book was created by someone. And it's the same for your book of life, your DNA. It was created by God.
It was created by chemistry and natural selection, which is not nothing.
You're not here by just chance. You're not a mistake.
Creationists love to use the words accident and mistake whenever they describe people being created by nature as opposed to some deliberate intelligence. These are pejorative words they use to try to poison the well. They want people to feel icky about the idea that life was not someone's conscious, deliberate idea.
The prophecies of the Bible. There are so many prophecies in the Old Testament that came true, that were fulfilled. And if we just look at the prophecies of Jesus, there's around 300 of them. Things like where he would be born and...
There's a prophecy that says the Messiah would be born in Bethlehem, but there's little evidence that Jesus was born in Bethlehem. And the Bible passages that say he was born there are quite absurd. Most evidence points to Jesus being from Nazareth. The passages that say he was born in Bethlehem claim that Joseph and Mary had to go there because of a census which required everyone to return to their ancestral homeland to be counted. Not only is there no record of any such census, which is weird given that keeping records is the whole point of a census, the premise is nonsense. Everybody in the whole jurisdiction had to go back to the town their ancestors were from? That seems like a pretty tall order, and an unworkable logistical nightmare. It seems pretty clear that this story was a later addition to make Jesus fit with the Messiah prophecy.
These were prophecies that were made hundreds of years before Jesus even walked the earth. And they all came true. Let's look at just some of them within the time of Jesus' crucifixion. Zechariah 13 verse 7 prophesies that Jesus would be deserted by his disciples, and you can see that it happened in Mark 14 verse 50 and in Matthew 26 verse 31.
That passage says, "Strike the shepherd and the sheep will be scattered." You have to be pretty hermeneutically creative to interpret that as talking about Jesus. It isn't clearly the case at all that it's about Jesus. Certainly no rabbi would interpret it that way.
And then Psalm 35 verse 11 says, he would be falsely accused.
The psalm was written by Jeremiah, and he is talking about his own treatment, not the treatment of Jesus.
Which you can see happened in Matthew 26 verse 60. Isaiah 50 verse 6 prophesies Jesus would be brutally beaten.
No, it doesn't. Isaiah 50 is talking about the servant being beaten. The servant is not Jesus. Isaiah 41:8 explicitly identifies the servant as Israel, sometimes called Jacob. This is not a prophecy about the Messiah.
And that happened in Matthew 26 verse 67. Isaiah 53 verse 7 says Jesus would not retaliate. And you can read that he didn't in Matthew 27 verse 14.
This passage is also about the servant who is explicitly identified as being Israel.
Isaiah 53 verse 12 says he would be executed with criminals, which then happened in Matthew 27 verse 38 and also in Luke 23 verse 32.
Nope, that's still Israel, not Jesus. Also, there are stories in Isaiah that don't fit with the story of Jesus. Isaiah 7:14 says that a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and his name shall be called Emmanuel. If Isaiah's prophecies are about Jesus, why wasn't Jesus' name Emmanuel?
And here's a very interesting one. Psalm 22 verse 66.
There's no such thing as Psalm 22 verse 66. Psalm 22 only has 31 verses, 32 in the Hebrew version.
And Zechariah 12 verse 10 prophesied that Jesus' hands and feet would be pierced, meaning crucified, which is interesting because back then crucifixion did not even exist yet. And we can see that it happened when we read Mark 15 verse 24.
Zechariah 12:10 talks about piercing, but it doesn't mention hands and feet being pierced. So it is not clearly talking about crucifixion. That passage also doesn't mention Jesus. It certainly doesn't identify him by name, but it also doesn't talk about the Messiah. There's no reason to believe this verse has anything to do with Jesus.
There's a lot more prophecies, but I think you get it. You understand that it's impossible for humans to predict what would happen in the future in such detail.
What detail? A lot of these prophecies aren't about the Messiah at all, and the ones that are seem pretty vague to me.
I mean, there's a lot more prophecies apart from Jesus that all came true. Like in Ezekiel 26 verse 7 to 9, it's prophesied that the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar would destroy the mainland of Tyre and throw the building material into the sea. The prophecy was written in 586 to 587 BC, and it partly came true in 573 BC, and then fully in 332 before Christ, when Alexander the Great threw the building material into the sea.
But the prophecy said that Nebuchadnezzar's army would throw the building material into the sea, not Alexander's army. Why are you citing a prophecy that was wrong as evidence that prophecies came true?
And then Isaiah 45 also prophesies that Babylon's gates would be opened to Cyrus. This prophecy was made in 701 to 681 BC, and it came true in 539 before Christ.
The parts of Isaiah that talk about Cyrus were not written from 701 to 681 BCE. The first 39 chapters of Isaiah are thought to have been written by Isaiah the prophet, who lived during that time, but the authorship after that becomes murky. Scholars refer to the earliest author of the book of Isaiah as Proto-Isaiah, the author of chapters 40 through 55 as Deutero-Isaiah, and the author of the rest as Trito-Isaiah. It would be quite impressive if Deutero-Isaiah had made that prophecy about Cyrus before about 600 BCE when Cyrus was born, but he didn't. Contemporary biblical scholars will tell you that he wrote it as Cyrus's army was already near the gate of Babylon. To everyone who helps me out on Patreon, you're a big help. Thanks so much.